The social meta-theory: how individuals, organizations, and societies evolve through distinct stages of evolution marked by periods of revolution. Briefly, the social meta-theory pulls together all of the major social sciences into one cohesive theory that shows how individuals, organizations, and society evolve through 5 distinct stages, noted here by stage 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, marked by periods of revolution, noted here by crisis A, crisis B, crisis C, and crisis D. And all of the major social sciences, while spoken differently with different terminology, have similar frameworks that show how an individual, an organization, or society go through different stages of evolution. Some of them indicate the crises and the revolution that occurs between those stages, and some of them just merely describe the stages without the crises. As this theory emerged, it was easy to turn around and start to apply the crises back to any framework that didn't already have those elements in the original theory. Briefly, stage 1 is an evolutionary process where the individual, the organization, or the society evolve. Then they go through a crisis, and then they end up in the next stage inside of that process. The same is true for the evolution and then the revolutionary periods. You'll be in an evolutionary period, and then you'll be in a crisis. In the first crisis is the crisis of organization, and then you'll evolve through the second stage for a period before you enter into the crisis of autonomy. Briefly, the stages are survival, structure, independent or independence, becoming social, and then actualization. And terminology has been picked up from various theories that have the best term to describe that stage and also the crisis between the two. One thing that must be understood about the various theories and about how to look at the various theories in conjunction with each other is to look at the difference between a healthy, which would be the chart up above, versus an unhealthy individual, organization, or society. In other words, when we get into the theory, I'll talk about healthy status of a country and culture based on the predominance of people who fall within stage 3 in their personal evolution, fitting within a culture or a rule set that's stage 3, fitting within a society and working within organizations that are stage 3. And those stages make sense and work for that culture, despite there being other stages and evolutionary tracks that the individual, organization, or society could follow. When these are inconsistent, something breaks down in the individual, the organization, or the society. And I'll get into a couple of examples of that in just a moment. So what happens is the individual is cruising along. They have a series of consistent behaviors that are stage 2. They build up a critical mass of issues. This is best explained in organizations where a critical mass of individuals are ready to operate at a different, higher performance level. They go through a crisis, and then the critical mass moves into stage 3. So this concept of critical mass is necessary to understand how an individual or an organization or a society evolves into that next stage. Before we dive in too far, I want to talk about the various types of groups that are addressed in the theory and not addressed. First group is the individual. That's the individual, the self, and a lot of individual sciences are referenced that address the individual. Then there is the pack or the family, and that would be anywhere from 2 to upwards of 10 or so in size. Think a wolf pack or a family of humans. And this theory does not address that particular group. This theory was brought together merely to discuss the individual, organization, and society. At some point, I may go back and figure out how the pack and the family will operate in different stages, but we do not do that in this theory. An organization is an organization of anywhere between 50 and 150, and in many cases up to the tens of thousands, but then we're actually talking about societies. And the organization really is about the biological limit of human for operating in a group, which would be between 50 and 150 as a tribal creature. So as humans merged our tribes together, we ended up in society. So the organization is really a tribe, or the biological limit of human for operating inside of a group of people. And then ultimately society. Number of tribes come together, society creates new rules and new norms, and even societies, as they aggregate, go through different evolutionary stages. I'm going to start by teasing out a couple of major theorists and showing how their specific theory, while not specifically describing the meta-theory, the way the meta-theory is designed, still go through different stages of evolution and have in them with augmentation, and Kiyosaki will be the first example of that, of how individuals evolve through their financial intelligence. Kiyosaki talked about the employee, then becoming self-employed, then becoming a business owner, then becoming an investor. What naturally exists in the world is the concept of being dependent on somebody for your financial well-being, which all babies, children, and people who are not yet on their own actually are. They are dependent. So there's this first tier in a 5-tier theory. Kiyosaki's theory was actually only 4 tiers, but if you add this dependent layer, then you get the concept of what dependence is. And that dependence is a first stage concept. Becoming an employee means you're dependent on somebody else for your income. They make all the major decisions and you perform basic work. Becoming self-employed, you become a solopreneur, you evolve into becoming somebody who can manage all aspects of generating wealth. Then you hire individuals and you become a business owner. You think at a higher level. You have to concern yourself with the individuals as well as the organization itself. And when you've become a successful business owner, you then make a good investor because you can understand how a business owner operates and how to place money into organizations that drive financial growth. So that was out of the Rich Dad, Poor Dad book, and shows the 5 different stages expressed as Kiyosaki had it, with one augmentation called dependent. Maslow's hierarchy of needs is a fantastic way to express the overall meta-theory, because as we get into the different theories, the individual theories, each one of those theories fits into the model that's fairly well understood according to Maslow's hierarchy of needs. At the bottom tier, your physiological or your survival needs are managed. Then the second tier, or stage 2, you start to focus on safety and comfort. And you can actually tease out what those mean, and you'll see that the behaviors inside of safety and comfort fit in with other theories at that tier. The next thing you concern yourself with is psychological and belonging. And then you move on to self-esteem, looking for what makes you feel good, and then self-actualization, or the actualization highest state in Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Now, what Maslow doesn't tease out are what are those crises between physiological and safety comfort. And what the meta-theory provides is what that crisis looks like to go from physiological survival state of mind to looking for safety and comfort. There's a revolution or a crisis that the individual goes through before they become concerned with safety and comfort. MacLean had the triune brain theory, and I use this more to express the state of the brain that the individual is operating from when they're operating at a different stage. At the base is the reptilian complex, the survival complex. Again, go back to the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, that physiological survival exists in the survival reptilian brain. Then the paleo-mammalian complex, the emotional brain, is two different stages of the theory in one layer of the brain. And that would be stages 2 and 3 that fit within that. And stages 2 and 3 in Maslow's hierarchy of needs is safety and comfort, psychological and belonging. Those are emotional concepts. So both of those two emotional things fit within the paleo-mammalian complex emotional brain. And then finally on the very top is the neo-mammalian brain, or the logical brain, the neocortex, where all your frontal lobe thinking occurs. And if you look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs, self-esteem and self-actualization are logical frontal lobe type conversations. And this is just an expression of how the brain works, the brain itself, which plays into how the rest of the meta theory works, because it's literally about the brain and how the brain evolves through those different stages. Another theory that plays into the overall meta theory at the organizational level is tribal leadership by Logan and others, where at the base level is the alienated stage. Then the individual participates in the organizations as separate but not alienated. So at the bottom level, the individual has the mental state of life sucks and hangs out with no one. In stage 2, they get that not all of life sucks, just my life sucks, and I have loose contact with other individuals, but I'm still separate from the group. Then there's a crisis, and the individual at the personal level starts to build dyadic relationships, one-on-one relationships, where they get the idea that they're great. The concept of greatness starts to emerge in the individual, and they form these relationships because they're feeling great, because they're feeling like they're great. Then the individual evolves into triadic relationships and form partnerships and teams, and they get the concept of we're great. And then as the teams evolve, they form groups of triads and form larger teams, and the concept life is great, the external world of greatness. And there's a lot of stuff that goes into Logan's book about what that team stage is. The concerns are not of, in a business, they're not just about making money, they're about an issue. And the issue is the motivator within the organization. But I'm not going to dive into all that inside of this. Granier was an organizational theorist in business schools in the 1970s, and he created a organizational evolutionary concept where at the initial stage of an organization, so you've got young to old organization and small to large, and I believe that that is limiting for how organizations behave. It's not directly correlate that by having a mature, large organization that you're going to be living in a world of collaboration. It's what's necessary to survive there, but that's not what's there. Inside of his theory, he talked about the crises between stages of going from an organization that is young and creative, that you go through a crisis of leadership to get into to start to follow into a direction. Then that direction There's a crisis of autonomy, where individuals need to become autonomous. And then there's a crisis of delegation, where then you go through, then you go through the stage of delegation, and you end up in the crisis of control. And then you go through a stage of coordination, and you go through a crisis of red tape, and then you end up in the world of collaboration. And interestingly enough, those stages, while not as accurate according to contemporary theory, still the model that he created operates and works. So this is just bringing in yet another theorist that falls into it. This is a summary chart of the theories, broken it down into the major theories that make it easy to discuss what the theories are about inside of one cohesive model. So across the top, we have the science on the left-hand column, the theorist, the name of the theory, the stages of the theory, inside of the theory, where the theory exists. If you see something where there's a parentheses, as I noted earlier when discussing Kiyosaki, that is something that I have added to their theory to make their theory fit into this model where appropriate. Some places I don't add a concept to it, I just put it in there. If in the theorist column it says Lewis, that means it's a theory that I've generated as a natural correlate to the overall theory and have created these stages as a way to express how dependency works and responsibility. There's also the concept of integrity, social consciousness, and other sorts of individual behaviors, and then organizational behaviors, how an organization operates with integrity. That is not on this chart, and are other concepts that get naturally derived from the overall theory. So when looking at the theory, for individual, this is broken down into individual, organization, and society. So the individual goes through evolutionary stages. I'll start with Piaget. Piaget, the first stage is the sensory motor stage. That's all about being in the physical world. Then there's pre-operational. Pre-operational means that you're not yet to the point where, as an individual, you will know that there is something on the other side. When a ball is covered with a blanket, the ball disappears, and you wave the blanket off, and then it shows up again. And there's a crisis that occurs to bring you to the world of concrete operations, where everything becomes physical and connected, which then leads to formal operations, and then finally metacognition, where you are able to pull together large concepts and understand large ideas in this fifth stage. Freud had similar stages, and I don't bring Freud into the conversation because his theories are considered accurate today. Most of them have been disbanded or disallowed or disavowed because of the way that he did his science, but his framework is appropriate, and that's why the framework of Freud is applied here. Inside of Freudian, and there's a chart that'll actually dive into these, tease these out a bit further so you can see the differences between Piaget and Freudian psychology. His stages were oral, anal, phallic, latency, and genital. Again, very sexual oriented, very physical body, and the things that he used to do were sort of indicative of the way that he believed in his theory. But if you look at the concepts themselves, they actually fit into this model of the overall meta theory, even though the theory itself is not particularly accurate. Psychology, Erikson goes through the individual goes through psychosocial stages of hope, will, having purpose, having competence, and then fidelity. And some of these theories actually go beyond stage 5, and I did not include stages 6 and 7 if their theories were around and available. We already spoke about Maslow's motivation and personality hierarchy of needs, and MacLean's triune brain. In the world of psychology, there is the concept of dependency, where you start off you are dependent, and you become rules dependent, meaning you need to follow rules to be able to perform. And this is a very stage 2 anal retentive concept. I must have a rule. There must be a rule for me to follow. Then there's the stage of independence. And in the world of independence, you're becoming independent. And you go back to Piagetian or Freudian, you're in that space, you're becoming independent, you're getting concrete operations, you're starting to stand on your own. Then there's the concept of mutual dependence, and this is something that plays into the tribal leadership column of becoming mutually dependent and then interdependent as the highest level of dependency. So you get the concept of becoming interdependent on others, not just on the individuals that you're loosely affiliated with. In the world of sociology, you start off with responsibility. Stage 1 is centralized, meaning that you require a government or somebody else to tell you what to do. Then society starts to become the source of where responsibility comes from. Then organizations, your local group, and then the individual in stage 5 takes full responsibility for everything. So at some stage along the way, responsibility goes from external to the individual, closer and closer to the actual individual themselves taking full responsibility, full accountability. Let me go into organization. We talked a bit already about business organizations. What we didn't talk about was Collins' book, Good to Great. At stage 1, there's the highly capable individual, then contributing team member, competent manager, effective leader, and then this thing they just call level 5. And that is how organizations go through their 5 stages according to Collins. Happens to pair up with the stages of Grenier with creativity, direction, delegation, coordination, and then collaboration. And then how individuals operate within those organizations by Logan in tribal leadership. You start off alienated, then separate, then personal, then partnership, then team. Then groups of organizations get together and they operate. So the idea is you get individuals that are operating at a stage, at whatever stage they're in, can operate within an organization that's set up here and consistently can operate within a society that meets their needs. And they operate in a place without constraints. They feel free. They feel whatever they're up to. And that all plays out in the societal definition. Now, to begin with, I take Marx and I've teased out something that Marx didn't have in his theories, which is a distinction of how leaders are defined versus how the economy operates. And economy as how many classes exist and how the financial system operates. So I took leadership selection and teased that out as stage 1, totalitarian, authoritarian. Stage 2, kingdom, monarchy, sort of a feudalist society. Stage 3 being representative democracy. Stage 4 as direct democracy, so you take out the representative between you and the decision maker, and you end up in your direct democracy. And then finally, at the very tail end, is the concept of individual democracy. It means that you're making decisions for yourself, by yourself, as an individual operating at the highest of all stages. You're able to operate in a world of integrity and don't require leadership other than the self. Now, there may in fact be leadership in the society, but as an individual and as the capabilities of that society exist, the individual democracy has a bunch of individuals making conscious, rational decisions on their own. These are theoretical tiers, and none of them have actually existed as far as I can tell. So these are natural correlates to Piagetian theory. Lots of people in the metacognition stage Maslow's hierarchy of needs, lots of people in the self-actualization, critical mass of people that are working in organizations that are in collaborative level 5 team can now start to operate in a society with other organizations, a critical mass of other organizations who operate at this level in a world where you have individual democracy. So it's a very, very theoretical concept. In economics, Marx talked about trade and barter, feudalism, and that's where you've got a kingdom or a monarchy. Talked about capitalism, where capital becomes the center of the economy. He also talked about socialism and, of course, communism. And there's a lot of sensitivity in the American dialect around the terms socialism and communism, but those are what happens as a society evolves and you end up losing a class or two. So Marx talked about the class struggle. It's been teased out here, not in terms that Marx had, but in ways to describe how the different classes operate. On the very bottom level, the first tier, we have untouchable, a term borrowed from the Hindu culture, lower class, working class, warrior class, and ruling upper class. And as you evolve through the 5 stages, you end up reducing the number of classes or tiers within the classes themselves. In stage 2, when you go into feudalism, you no longer need an untouchable class. You still have your lower class, your peasants, you have your middle class, you have your warriors, you have your middle class, your tradesmen, you have the lower class, which would be the peasants, and of course the kings. In a third tier class system that supports capitalism, supports a representative democracy, you have 3 tiers. You have a lower class, a middle class, and an upper class. And that is roughly how North America is, or United States are today in 2017. As your culture evolves, you lose the lower class. The way that these class systems change over time is that the bottom tier gets taken out and the ruling / upper is more a representation of the behavior of the individuals rather than the number of people who are managing or ruling. So as we evolve into as a economy evolves into the next tier, the lower tier of the economy will be eliminated, leaving just a middle class and an upper class. And then finally, in the theoretical highest end, there's nothing but ruling an upper class. If you think about the major billionaires who are investors, who operate in are self-actualized, who behave in the stage 5 behaviors, work in organizations that are stage 5 organizations, we end up with just a ruling and upper class group of people in the society. Then there are theological stages, starting with, so Comte had a description of how religion evolves through animism, polytheism, then to monotheism. So polytheism being the Zeus conversation, monotheism creating just one deity out of many. Again, in parentheses, natural correlates of the meta theory is that there is a concept theism, and then finally at the highest level, solotheism, where the deity returns to the individual. So in stage 4, it's about concepts of what a deity is, and then by the highest tier, the individual becomes that deity. And then on the very bottom, where ethics goes, starts stage 1, sword, stage 2, pen. So this is about warring, physical, then to the pen, religion, and ethics, and then consensus. And these are things that are natural, again, a natural correlate of the overall theory. I'm going to show you the larger panel of individuals, just to show that all of this stuff exists as teased out. So you can take MacLean's triune brain, there's the survival brain, the reptilian complex, the basal ganglia, all within just teased out differently so that you can see the different stages of MacLean. So the brain section, the behavior, stage 1 is aggression, dominance, territoriality, ritual displays. Stages 2 and 3, feeding, reproductive behavior, all emotional things. And that's also what you'll see in most of the stage 2 inside of here. So this is just provided to show you how things tease out and how the different theories compare to each other, how Piaget's theories compare, age ranges, and so on. Erikson had his age ranges and the stuff inside of all that. The next stage is organization, and in this, I'm just showing the full expression of Logan, the tribal leadership, broken out by group behavior, cultural anatomy, relationships. Inside of Grenier, he talked about leadership, politics, how the leadership style. This is where a lot of the theory really came to light. This is when I was in business school, we were studying Grenier. Where your motivation comes from, mutual goal setting. So the point being that all of these theories all tease out into deeper and deeper versions of the theory, and all of this is discussed actually in the book itself. Once again, the theory is available at metatheory.social, and I'm Rob Lewis. Thanks for watching. No! Oh, I didn't even... Are you shitting me? Alright, well, I learned a lot. Motherfucker. God damn it. Alright, so I'm going to have to turn this off.
Hey, Rob, it's Ian. Hey, I was going to talk to you about RSVP to Justin next Saturday. I'm sorry about this. Got back to you yet. So I'm still on the wait list for Duke, and the first day of school is on Wednesday in 2 days, and I haven't heard back anything from them at all whatsoever. So I just haven't got back to you yet because I just don't know if they're going to call me tomorrow and just say, hey, you need to show up for the first day, or they're going to call me on Wednesday and say, hey, you need to show up on Thursday to go, because that very much could happen. So yeah, so I wanted to call and see what are my options, and I'd love to come if I'm not going to Duke, and I'll definitely be there. So yeah, so me and Haley will RSVP pending the Wednesday first day of school for Duke, and let me know what your thoughts are on that. Okay. All right, man. I will talk to you soon. Thank you for organizing this, and I can't wait to see you. I do get to go. Awesome. All right. Talk to you soon. Bye.
God.